3, 2. Hey, welcome to the first Ghosts of Plum Run podcast, featuring our author of the podcast, David Dixon, author of Radical Warrior, the first biography of August Willich. David, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Tim. And good to be with you.
Thanks for joining us. And with us today is the is Northeast Ohio's greatest Willich head, Jonathan Szerszen.
Thanks, Tim, for the introduction. I'm definitely ahead at this point.
So this is the very first August Willich head video of all time. And the first thing we want to say is thank you, David, for writing this book.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really surprising to see how many people have come out of the woodwork and know about this guy. I mean, I knew that there were a few Civil War buffs out there that were familiar with him, but he's just he's a lot more of a cult figure on the far left than I ever imagined. So I'm very happy about that, and interacting with all kinds of folks that I have never interacted with before, and learning a lot. So it's great.
So what is this cult figure of the left? How did you find out about this? What is, like, how big is this phenomenon that you've just described for us?
Well, Tim, I found out about it from you, as you well know.
as one would.
Right. So no, like I said, I had no idea. I had no political agenda writing this book. I just thought that this was a very unusual character who had a compelling life story and deserved a biography. And so when you and I started talking about your project, the Ghost of Plum Run, and you found out I was doing the Willich biography, then that's when you opened me up to this whole new world of Chapo Trap House and all of these people that apparently know who this guy is. So I'm just delighted and ready to learn and explore even more.
So have you spoken to any other of these radical lefties in their media?
Yeah, definitely on Twitter.
Okay.
So his name comes up on Twitter, and I think probably because of Matt Christman. But his name is on Twitter, I would say, every 2 or 3 days. Somebody mentions him on Twitter. And so what I've been trying to do is just, I'll search Twitter for his name. And when somebody pops up, I'll just kind of weigh in and answer their question or give them some perspective as far as I know. And yeah, so it's been really cool.
So Twitter is definitely where you'll find the radical leftists. That is definitely where they are.
In honor of this, we will now share with our viewers the following graphic.
Oh, it's soy-faced Matt on horseback. I love that.
So thank you, Matt. That's why we're all here. So I'm going to start with the question, then we'll go to Jonathan. My first question, David, is so Matt has this podcast individually called Kush Vlogs, where he's been talking a lot about Civil War, not necessarily Willich. We're disappointed in that. Read the book already. But his theory is that the Constitution as a document itself should have collapsed and not even survived the Civil War, because what the Civil War was the creation of this document. So once the document falls apart, like what do you think Willich would think about that?
Yeah, well, I don't know what he thinks about it because he didn't comment on it specifically. Obviously, the document wasn't thrown out, it was amended, right? So you had the three Reconstruction amendments, which really tried to help solidify some of the gains that have been made in terms of expanding the franchise, freeing the slaves eventually, so, and equal protection under the law. So Willich was interesting because his main objective in fighting for the Union was to ensure the survival of Republican government and end chattel slavery, which he really saw as almost the same as wage slavery in the North, right? So it was worker exploitation, whether it was on the factory floor or whether it was on the plantation. So from that standpoint, ending chattel slavery was absolutely essential to ever approaching any type of perfect republic that he felt was the end game for him. So he very much believed in Republican popular government, but of course the stain of slavery had really diminished, I think, what people had dreamed about in the French Revolution, and then of course in the American Revolution. So there were these dirty bargains made in the Constitution, and we lived with them for as long as we could live with them until we couldn't live with them anymore. And so the conflict came.
When Willich approached the post-war era, you didn't find any of his, did you find, I mean, there's not a whole lot of commentary about the Constitution.
No,
in his stuff.
Now, I will say that he certainly changed his tactics a couple times, right? So if you think back to when he was in Europe, I mean, it was a different situation there, right? You see, the aristocracy was ruling, capitalism was still very much in its embryonic form, and you had all kinds of new ideas floating out there about what we should do about the so-called social question. And so, Willich's idea was revolution from the ground up, right? So the proletariat rises and kills the monarch and starts immediately moves to this idealized communist state.
So let's go to this kills the monarch thing.
Yeah. Let's
because this is where I think Jonathan, this is a good segue into Jonathan's question.
Sure.
One of the things that the first Minnesota book that I'm writing, Ghosts of Plum Run, I did not go looking for a German immigrant story, but there it was.
Yeah.
And when you do a German immigrant story in the Civil War, you end up with August Willich and the 48ers. So Jonathan was very curious about Willich's experience in 48 vis-a-vis killing the monarchs.
Right.
Yeah, I found it like super interesting, and I also have the question to pose to you of why we never really heard about these 1848ers to begin with. Never in high school, college, we ever cover them at all. Like, right. Not even mention. And I'm like, you have, Karl Marx, not at the exact beating heart of it, but, his ideology is seeped into it. So to the point where you have to discuss it, and there's no discussing of it. Why do you think that is?
I think there's several reasons. I think, first of all, who are the people that are writing the textbooks, right? So, I mean, you're presenting, until Howard Zinn came out with his history books, really, I mean, the public just bought whatever the controlling elite at the time were sending out in terms of the messaging. So the fact that Willich, not only Willich, but many of these 48ers, as you mentioned, were known communists or communist sympathizers. And so it's very interesting to me that they may have been derided in their time for their politics, but yet they were welcomed with open arms into helping defend the Union. So I think the ideology, when you think about McCarthyism in the 50s, and I don't know how far back you want to go, but there's a lot of reasons why, from a political standpoint today, that you might not want to include communist American heroes.
Yes. Did Willich consider himself a communist? Like,
Yeah,
by label?
yes, and especially early on, right? So, like I said, these philosophies were just in embryo, right? So the Communist Manifesto is written in 1848. I mean, so these are brand new ideas. So yes, he embraces communism as an endpoint throughout his life. He believes that a collective state with collective ownership of the means of production is the ultimate goal. Now, in terms of tactics, that varies situationally. So the tactics in 1848 are, from his point of view, is violent overthrow of the existing regime and immediately replacing that with a communist society. So this is a radical restructuring of the entire social, economic, and political order in Europe. In retrospect, I think that maybe is a little naive to think that you could go from where they were with hereditary monarchical rule to that situation, right? But that's where he was at. And so where he and Marx start to disagree is over the timeline and the tactics. So of course, Willich is more of a romantic idealist, a true socialist, as he was called rather derisively by Marx. Marx is really a materialist, right? So Marx is an economic determinist. So Marx sees this long march through various stages of economic development, with the driving force being economic self-interest, right? Eventually getting to the point where it blossoms into full-blown collectivist communist society. Willich, on the other hand, is impatient. He's not willing to wait generations for this to happen. So that's where the two butt heads, is because Marx sees Willich as this irresponsible romantic dreamer that's going to screw up this whole movement. And in a way, I think Marx is probably correct in that assumption at that point.
It was like a Twitter fight. I mean, that's what it was. It was a Twitter
fight. It was like a Twitter fight. Yeah.
So for 160 years, Marx wins this Twitter fight because we're talking about him. Everybody talks about him.
Sure.
And Willich tries to steal his wife. and we don't know anything about it. Like, none of us have. I'm from Ohio. Jonathan's from Ohio. You know,
right.
He's buried here.
Well, I think there's a lot of characters we don't know about in this. And back to Jonathan's original question, it's not just the communist ideology that is keeping him and his peers out of the textbook. It's World War I, it's World War II. It's,
yes. Yeah.
I think even most importantly, it is the difficulty of getting at the sources, right? So, I mean, if you really want to write a full-length biography of a fellow like Willich, I mean, the sources are all over the world. And then you have, the problem of the German script. You have the problem of the Fraktur.
Oh yeah, like when I was researching the regiment, the 1st Minnesota, all I kept thinking was, I wish I had those Germans' letters,
right?
And I could translate them because I know they're out there. I mean, they wrote in German home.
Yes, yeah. So that's a big inhibiting factor, and one of the reasons I think why there hasn't been more scholarship on Germans in particular, and the 48ers in general, whether you're talking about Hungarians or Scandinavians.
Well, Jonathan and I were talking about this. I'm on this dude's podcast, Untold Civil War, in a minute, and he did a whiskey tasting of the Fighting 69.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Did you watch that?
I did.
So I went looking for the Fighting 69 whiskey, and I can't get it here, so that's why I'm drinking Rolling Rock tonight. But the Fighting 69, Thomas Marr was a 48er.
Yeah, there's an excellent biography. I would say maybe the best Civil War biography I read that year, and it was published about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's called The Immortal Irishman. And it's about Thomas Marr and the Irish Brigade. But similar
because
to
the Irish have to always be the best. They always have to be the best.
Well, let me tell you, there were 180,000 to Irishmen, and there were 216,000 Germans in the
Right. If you count it up, it's the Germans that win. Like I went counting Italians because I'm half Italian.
Right.
I went counting Polish dudes, Polacks. I can say Polacks because I'm half Polish. I went looking for them. Not a whole lot. It's the Germans and the Irish, and then the Germans by a long shot. So when do you get to this? Like, for instance, Willich's newspaper in Ohio. What have you seen translated from Willich's newspaper in Ohio?
Well, first of all, part of this project, I worked with a PhD candidate in Germany. So of course he's fluent. He did his master's thesis on Willich, and he's doing his PhD dissertation on Willich. So he has already written his master's thesis specifically around that time period. So
when can we have all of us on the show with that guy?
Actually, I did a podcast interview about 2 months ago where he and I were on that one together with a facilitator.
Why don't you send me this link?
Okay,
that would be excellent.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. I'm sure he'd love to talk to you guys. Yeah.
So you're talking to this guy. You're working with this guy from the PhD.
Yeah. So he and I were collaborating. I also had a volunteer German translator that I could send things to, and she would translate. Because the interesting thing is if you can go into Google Translate, and you can even take that Fraktur typeface, and you can highlight it. You can plug it into Google Translate, and it'll give you about 70% of the meaning, and then the rest is gobbledygook. But it gives you enough that you can see, oh, well, this is something that's really interesting. So when I found things like that, then I would simply email it to my friend in Germany, and she would do a verbatim translation. She translated Willich's 1847 pamphlet that he wrote. It was like 70 pages long. She translated the whole thing for me.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Do you have any translations from the Republikaner in Cincinnati?
I don't. I only have what I needed from my German PhD student.
All right, because I got a scene that's opening volume 3.
Mm-hmm.
It's not volume 2.
Right.
It's opening volume 3 because of that date of his first newspaper.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, I can get a hold of that for you.
I want the first thing he says in that newspaper.
Okay, okay. I know I have it, and I can send it to you in German, but I can probably get somebody to translate it.
Oh God! I mean, Jonathan, look at it. Look at the smile on his face. Oh my God.
I'm going to make a note on that. Actually,
Jonathan's day.
Yeah, and I would love to also read that pamphlet as well, the 47 one.
I can send you the translation of that.
The whole damn thing, right? Not.
So no,
that's one thing I also wanted to ask you about too. Was in the book you don't get too much into Willich like recruiting or propagandizing as much. Do you know what was his efforts when it came to that? Like, were there any like beer hall putsches, or like, give me an idea here of how he went about it?
Recruiting in what sense? Recruiting for soldiers, recruiting for the workers' parties, recruiting for the revolution? What time period?
You know what?
He did a lot of recruiting.
Hold on.
I was speaking specifically on 48 and, getting his fighting regiments up and running. Like he had to have been doing something to get, guys in uniforms for him.
Let me get it. I'll be right back.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
You guys carry on.
Yeah, from a certain standpoint, there was a small groundswell in 1848, and of course let me back up. There was a huge movement across Europe that as soon as the revolution kicked off in France, even though we didn't have Twitter at that time, these other revolutions start breaking out all over Europe, almost at the same time. It's almost like the Arab Spring.
That's a perfect example. Yeah,
it was like that. So there was already a lot of excitement going on at this time. Willich,
Somebody say Arab Spring.
yeah, Arab Spring.
yes.
It was kind of 1848 was I think kind of similar to the Arab Spring.
So this is what one of the beers that Jonathan brings to the house. What the hell?
Some milkshake stout, right?
Yeah, this is the milkshake stout. I don't know about this stuff, but I'm gonna have it for tonight. So carry on. Arab Spring. We're at the Arab Spring.
Yeah. So there was already a movement in place, and so when word reaches the Rhineland and Germany, for example, or Italy or wherever, that these events have broken out in Paris, then all of these people that have these liberal Republican sympathies and these workers that are feeling more and more.
All right, I'm stopping you right there. Because you did not start in Sicily. Okay? Let me show you something. This is my great grandfather who was Sicilian. Let's see.
Yeah.
There he is. Well, that's not showing up. Zoom kind of.
Yeah, you got some glare there.
Anyway, didn't this start in Sicily? Didn't 1848 start in Sicily?
It didn't start in Sicily, but that was one of the places where it erupted. Absolutely.
See, because that's important to me.
Yeah, I was in Sicily 2 years ago, actually, and we were actually touring a winery in Sicily, and they took us down into the barrels of the building, and it turns out that this winery had been in the family for many generations. And inside there, they had all of these swords and accoutrements from Garibaldi.
Oh my God.
I couldn't believe it.
Where is this place?
Yeah, I'm like, wait a second, I'm writing about this. And and if you read the book closely, I mean, Willich almost goes to Sicily twice. So
what was the relationship? What was relationship between Willich and Garibaldi?
Well, I have one letter that is written actually in French, and I have a little competency in French, so I could actually get through that one on my own. But so he writes his first letter, which is a really important letter, right when he arrives, just a few days after he arrives, to his friend Alexandre Szerszen back in France. So he writes it in French, and he makes a comment about Garibaldi that suggests to me that there was quite a bit of jealousy on his part.
Really?
So, and one of his great friends in Cincinnati, sometime later, moves to London, and in his memoirs, this fellow writes, "Well, I feel like I've met He meets Garibaldi, and he says, I feel like I've met this man before in the guise of my old friend Willich." So they were very similar personalities. They were very flamboyant. They were very, back to your question on recruitment. I mean, Willich is, because of the way that he left the Prussian army, and because of the letter that he wrote, and then the subsequent court-martial, and then the pamphlet that he writes, which the Prussian censors tried desperately to gather all of them and burn them, but a few of them still got out. There's even some in America, but he is somewhat of a famous figure overnight. And because of his rumored aristocratic or even royal background, he gets a lot of attention in the press. So as far as recruitment goes, he becomes one of the poster boys, let's say, for politicians like Struve and Hecker, the German politicians that are actually organizing this revolt. They need people like Willich, Franz Siegel, for example, who's a young, dashing Baden lieutenant. So they need some of these military men who have gone over to the revolutionary side to use, to your point, as exemplars of oh, well, look, you can join the Free Corps and you can march with Siegel or you can march with Willich. So I think in terms of recruitment, it wasn't so much of him personally going out and recruiting. It was just his name and his image that helped recruit people into that pitchfork revolution, if you want to call it
That makes a lot of sense to me. Also, one of my most favorite, Willage moments in the entire book, and it's right at the beginning, near the beginning, when they are like he's in retreat and he has, I believe it was Prussians, or I can't remember the exact troop delegation it was, but he's getting his ass kicked, and he just stops in the middle of the battle before any bullets are fired. Like, he is in big trouble with the way the troops are positioned. He is outnumbered, outgunned, and he just pulls out this Napoleonic speech out of his ass and walks out and is like, we're all Germans, we're all brothers, we're all of one blood, come join your brothers, essentially.
Right.
Could you speak more on that? Because that like moved me. I saw Napoleon on the march towards Paris right there, and it was incredible. You talk about flamboyancy.
Yeah, so that was in 1848. So if you think about it, there were actually 3 separate revolts, but the first one was 1848. That was Hecker's revolt. And so, Hecker has this grand vision that he's just going to announce the fact that they're going to establish a republic, and then 30,000 people are going to flock. So he ends up with like 500 troops, and he's facing off against an enemy force that was probably at least 4 times as large as his. So they meet near this bridge in the extreme southwest corner of Baden, or the German states, and there are a lot of these soldiers have mixed, and I'm talking about the government, the loyal government soldiers. They have mixed feelings, right? I mean, they're facing off, kind of like the American Civil War. They're facing off against relatives, against friends, against people from their own neighborhood who happen to have these different political sympathies. So it's not immediately apparent that all of these loyal local government soldiers are going to necessarily obey their commander. So that's when he actually starts his little speech and just walks right out in front of everyone when the 2 forces are facing off, and tries to encourage them as fellow Germans, as brothers, to not take this violent action against them, and actually come over to their side. Now, that didn't work at all in 1848, but it worked really well in 1849. So you had entire garrisons of you had entire garrisons surrendering their fortresses to the rebels in 1849. So the 1848 Hecker Revolution gets all the press and all the historical attention, but the 1849 revolution, which was the 3rd revolt in the German states, actually, it still never, I don't think, had any potential for success militarily, but in the end, they had upwards of 50,000 soldiers between the different rebel armies. They were still vastly outnumbered by the Prussians, but the fact that there was this ethnic brotherhood that they felt, and the Germans are very, very proud of their German ethnic heritage, and I think that really played in when it came around again to this battle over whether or not there was going to be a constitution in the German states, and that was what the 49 battle was all about. And there were many soldiers from the German states in the southwest of what's now Germany that went over to the rebels.
That is amazing. It's so crazy, like how he was able to just influence his men like that. You can read the charisma off the pages almost when it comes to him and picking these moments. Another thing that interests me was his relationship. You speak on like the brotherhood and like the familial aspect and the proud ethnic heritage. Is Willich's friendship with Fritz Aniki? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
What was to the extent, because I know they both immigrated to the United States according to the book, and like he was friends with him and his wife and everything.
Right.
Could you talk about their relationship more? Because it seems like they were brothers at arm, and it's this really neat story.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think briefly. So you had a really unusual situation with this reading circle in the 7th Prussian Artillery in Westphalia there. So you had Aniki, who was actually senior to Willich. You had Willich, and you also had Joseph Wiedemeyer, who becomes Marx's mouthpiece in America. So a very important. In fact, Wiedemeyer coined the phrase "dictatorship of the proletariat." So he was the first person that actually said that. So you have all these.
And where did Wiedemeyer serve? He was a general too, wasn't he?
He was, no, I don't think he was a general. I think he was a colonel, and he was in New York. So it was one of the New York regiments, but I don't remember which one.
This is just what is stunning to me, is that all of these dudes end up in the Union Army. Like all of these badasses running around, communist this, chop off their head that, go after the,
Right.
They end up in the Union Army.
Yeah, and they are considered dangerous red radicals. But when it
watched by by their superiors, I mean, was Willich on some list, or I mean, what did Sherman think of him? What did Grant think of him?
Yeah, I mean, Sherman didn't have an abiding love for immigrants in general, or blacks in general, for that matter. However, Sherman is on record on several occasions for praising his leadership. It's interesting, and now I get back to Jonathan's question, but it's interesting that I don't find the same level of nativism and the same level of animus directed towards these immigrant soldiers in the West that we so famously saw in the East, right? So the Germans, for example, at Chancellorsville, yeah. I mean, the Flying Dutchman, and there is some, and the Germans in the Western regiments do complain about nativism and feel like that they get some of the worst tasks in terms of repairing bridges and building roads and things like that. But there doesn't seem, I didn't run across, and certainly Willich is a strong-minded person, so he has conflicts with his superiors. But I didn't find any of those conflicts really rooted in some type of anti-immigrant prejudice, and it kind of surprised me, really. But
that was in the Western Army.
Yeah, in the Western theater, it didn't, and perhaps it was because the 9th Ohio and the 32nd Indiana, and I mean you had the 15th Wisconsin, Hans Hegg's Scandinavian regiment. You had some really high performing regiments.
Even in the average Midwestern regiment, there was a corps of Germans who spoke German.
Right.
Almost all of them. And I only learned that through the 1st Minnesota, because you cannot go into the 1st Minnesota without running into Germans everywhere. I mean, it's incredible. And this was throughout the Union Army. This was not just a couple of generals who hung out with Engels on the march. This was throughout the Union Army.
But Jonathan was asking about Anarchy and that circle and the friendship there. So I mean, one of the reasons, besides his growing alienation from the military in general, but one of the reasons that Willich ends up resigning is because he's defending his friend Anarchy, who has become this
Solidarity.
free thinker, and so that's how he gets into trouble. They do become lifelong friends, but I have to tell you that the other really interesting thing I found in doing this is how many strong women there were among the German revolutionaries. And almost every one of the key figures that I've come across has a wife that is like Anarchy's wife, who is following the army and is riding along with them and carrying dispatches and putting themselves in danger. And then, of course, after the war, Anarchy's wife, Francesca Anarchy, Matilda Anarchy, becomes much more well-known and much more famous than her husband. She is a real early feminist women's labor organizer. I mean, she really is an interesting figure. There's going to be a biography of a new biography of her coming out pretty soon, I think. But,
I didn't know any of that. That's amazing.
Yeah, so it was really interesting how time and again, when I studied his peers in that revolution, how many strong women were right there, by their sides, not fighting, of course.
Which brings us to August Willich again.
Yes, okay.
No women in his life.
Yes.
The only woman. Now you don't mention that. You mentioned there's a rumor that he was with a former slave or something.
I wanted to bring this up too. I found this really interesting.
Yeah. So, I know where you're coming from, Tim. I mean, I know that Tim's analysis of Willich is he was bisexual.
Had to be.
And I totally understand where you're coming from, and Marx, for example, mentions his sexual repressions because he is so committed to his cause.
Because Marx is a dick. Because Marx, that's what Marx does.
He is a
that
shit.
Is what Marx does. But Marx is right in terms of Willich's personality and painting himself as such an ascetic, such a martyr for the cause that time and time again you come across where he talks in his letters to various people about, God, it's really great that you have such a strong wife in your life. I kind of wish I had something like that, but I just never made room for it. So that's what I mostly read. Now, as far as his homosexual encounters, the only source for that is Marx and Engels, who by this point are bitter enemies with, and of course, as you mentioned, Tim, Marx is the king of character assassination. So Marx hates everybody, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was gonna destroy whoever was in his way every chance he had.
Yeah. So other scholars have made statements that Willich was a closet homosexual. I mean, I just don't have the evidence to make that call.
Well, what about this lady in the South in Washington?
Yeah, so that's the flip side. So what I do have is I have several accounts that he had a girlfriend when he was a refugee in France. Then I have a letter that he wrote to.
Hold on. He had a girlfriend in France.
Yeah, he had a girlfriend. He had a girlfriend, a Jewish girlfriend, while he was living in France.
I mean, this
That
guy
is awesome.
This guy gets better every time you turn a page. He had. This is in was this in Paris or was this?
No, this is in Besançon, which is was a small village in
the town on the border.
So he's sweeping this French village girl off her feet, and
I don't know.
While he's got a choir. Didn't he have a choir? They had a choir. They
Oh,
have-
yeah, sure. Of course. Yeah, of course. They're Germans. I mean, these guys are singing all the time, right? Yeah.
Did you
So,
ever, did you ever come across any of the programs for like their choir?
No, there are several men and my friend Felix and I, my German colleague, we went to Besançon, right? So we went to the archives there, and they were very hospitable, even though my French is like 30 years old and I couldn't really speak it very well, but they're really nice. And there are a lot of newspapers there, and the newspapers give accounts of two specific performances that they had in Besançon to raise funds for the refugees, because these guys were on the verge of starvation and dying in the hospital for, off and on for about 18 months. So, but yeah, the interesting letter was the letter he sent to his friend Gottfried Kinkel in 1857 back in Germany, where he describes this, in German, it translates to tropical flower, and then I forget what the other phrase was, but anyway, there are two phrases.
Tropical flower. Now that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, tropical flower, and I don't remember what the other phrase was, but it was pretty clear that this was coded language for, I am in love with a woman of color, and he stated that he is thinking about marriage.
And
Now,
this
what
was in
happened-
Washington, D.C.
Wow.
This is when he's in Washington, D.C. It's about 1857 or 58. Now, what happens is, I don't know what happens with that relationship because we don't have any personal papers, but that rumor surfaces again in Cincinnati in the Republicaner in 1859. And Willich,
No paper?
and Willich denies it. Willich denies it. And that's a really interesting thing that he didn't come out and admit it. I guess that was because he's a radical abolitionist. He forms partnerships with local black leaders in Cincinnati.
I wanted to.
He doesn't want to tell people about this woman he was dating.
Yes, he doesn't want to. That apparently that is beyond the pale. Apparently that is. I mean, he's got to be somewhat politically correct at some point, and that's where he draws the line, because they would just they might chase him out of town, because I mean, certainly it's illegal to marry a woman of color in Washington, D.C.
So you think he made a political calculation about that?
I don't know. It's really hard to speculate. It's whether the relationship just didn't work out. But this, again, most of the sources we have for this man, even though we don't have a collection of personal papers, we have really intimate letters written, private letters. So this letter that he's writing back is certainly not a letter that's ever intended to be seen publicly. So again, I mean, is it possible that he had dalliances with strapping young artisans it's certainly possible.
Why not?
Possible.
Why not? He's a communist.
Right.
This was the interesting thing for me when I made a 48er out of one of these Germans in the first Minnesota, was how radical is this guy going to be?
Right.
Because, it's unlikely there was an actual 48er in the first Minnesota, but there is one. There was one who fought under Siegel, and he's in a completely different company. I don't think he made it to Gettysburg. Maybe that's why he's not in the book. It was very important that they were all at Gettysburg. But, how radical is this guy going to be? So I just decided he's going to be as radical. It's the most radical thing anybody's ever heard of.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that this was pretty common in this group of soldiers, especially the guys who are on the march. I mean, how many miles did they march across France and Switzerland?
Yeah. I mean, stripping away all of the 19th century social mores and filtering, damn well there were thousands of gay men and bisexual men in the Union Army. There just had to be, right? But we don't hear about them, probably for many of the same reasons that we were talking about earlier about why we don't hear about the communists, right? It's just
If they ever were going to talk about it, it would be exactly like you were saying, in these coded terms, in these personal letters.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it would be great. There's some Jim Downs, for example, is a gay man who's a terrific scholar that's doing a lot of groundbreaking work. And I'm sure if there aren't already, that there are probably studies going on to try to parse that out as best we can. But it's kind of like espionage in the Civil War, right? I mean, we know there was a lot of spies on both sides in the Civil War, but they were spies. So how much paper trail is there really going to be? There's not going to be a lot.
So let me ask you something about what got you interested in the Civil War when you were younger.
I really wasn't that interested in the Civil War when I was young. Honestly. No, I'm not a Civil War nerd at all, and I'm still not. In fact, the first time I ever went to one of these Civil War roundtables was when I was speaking at one. So
really,
yeah. So I am not a Civil War geek. And most of the audiences that I speak to, they probably know a lot more about the Civil War than I do.
So did you watch Ken Burns thing?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. But no, my father died rather early, and so when I was doing my family history, I started researching that family, and I found these Southerners in my family that were big slaveholders, but they were also very strong Union men. In fact, 2 of the 3 brothers actually died because of their Union sympathies. And I thought that was so unusual. And so when I went back to school in my 40s to get my master's, I was looking for a topic for my master's thesis, and I decided to do it on these Southern Union men. And that got me interested in the Civil War, and I published a couple of articles and and then, all of a sudden now I'm connected to all these Civil War enthusiasts. And
you're originally from Michigan, right?
Huh?
You're originally from Michigan?
I wish I was originally from Michigan, but no.
I
was born in Texas.
Texas.
You were from Michigan. Why did I think you were from Michigan?
I don't know. We lived all over the country, but yeah. So the Civil War just kind of snuck up on me, and one thing led to another, and I published one book, and then when I was looking to research another book, I had no real abiding interest in Germans in the Civil War. I didn't know who August Willich was.
Me neither. I had no idea. Nothing.
Never heard of
no
him.
idea.
But I had a bunch of friends, and so I queried them. I said, "Hey, look, I'm just finished this book. I'm looking to do another book. Who do you think I should do?" And I came up with a list. I started making a list. I had about 12 people, and then I interviewed them. I said, "Hey, of these guys, which do you think?" And Willich was at the top of the list with these really terrific.
Like why was he at the top of the list for them?
I think
it's so interesting that they would choose him of all these options. Why him?
Yeah, I think number one, like I said, his story is so unusual and so compelling, right? And then secondly, these scholars realize that there is a dearth of biographies of German 48ers, right? So there is a need for more of these. You've got one on Siegel, you've got one on Osterhaus, you've got one on Schurz, and a few others, but not a lot.
Does Wiedemeyer have a biography?
Wiedemeyer does have a biography. It was written in the 1940s, and it's pretty good. It holds up pretty well. But and frankly, these Civil War geeks love Willich because of his accomplishments on the field, which frankly.
Yeah, I mean, his Battle of Chickamauga, I'm going through the scenario you're painting out, and I'm like, this guy's a military mastermind. He is just covering that retreat in the most synchronistic way I've ever seen, like the most intelligent way. I can't. Yeah. Can you speak more on that? Like, he was such a genius.
Isn't there a story you have from Chickamauga they wouldn't let you put in the book?
Wait, what?
Tell us that story. Tell us the Chickamauga story that you love about Willich that was not in the book.
Oh,
yeah. We got to hear it if it's not in the book.
Yeah, it's not in the book. Yeah.
This is for the head. So.
Okay. So yeah. Okay. So what happened was, of course, he did hard fighting. His brigade did hard fighting on both days, right? So on the 19th, on the first day, he was really upset because there was a general, I think it was Absalom Baird on his left, that as he was advancing and really, kicking some major Confederate butt, Baird's division was supposed to come up and cover him on his left flank, and they were late and they never really got there, to the point where he was outflanked and had to retreat. He felt like at that point he could have turned the Confederate right and maybe even done something similar to what the Confederates did to the Union on the next day, right?
Oh my God.
Longstreet broke through. So now again, this is his own viewpoint. Now, whether that really would have won the battle, but he claims that they might have won the battle, but he didn't have enough support, so he couldn't go as far as he could. So
it seems to happen a lot with him, is the incompetency of the people around him, not with his division, but just people not showing up at the right time, fog of war, all that.
Sure. Yeah, especially in a place like Chickamauga. But I mean, to be fair too, he was rather impulsive. He was brave to the point of being foolhardy at times. So I mean, they're
drilling in the middle of battle.
Exactly. So he may have advanced too far, and so maybe that's just his. Maybe Baird was the smarter guy and Willich was the impulsive guy. But anyway, so I find this great story, and of course, when you're writing something like this, you want to find these really great juicy stories. So I find this great newspaper article. Unfortunately, it's written by an anonymous source, but it's timely. It's written just a few years after Chickamauga. It's from a newspaper somewhere in Iowa, and it explains this encounter that Willich had with General Rosecrans, who was the commander of all Union forces at that conflict. And basically what it boils down to is that Willich is so upset at what happened on that first day and his failure of that division to support him, and complains about it to the point of where Rosecrans says, okay, that's it. Give me your sword. I'm relieving you of command. And according to this article, Willich says, no, you can't relieve me of command. These are my boys. They only fight for me. If you've got to keep me in here, we can deal with this after the battle, but you've got to. And supposedly then Rosecrans relents and allows him to go, fight with his boys. Now, it's a great story, but it's an anonymous source and it's uncorroborated. So when I passed it by Earl Hess, who is a distinguished Civil War scholar, probably written 30 books. He published 3 last year. It's ridiculous. So,
wow.
So Hess was one of my readers. So Hess read that and said, I've never heard of this. In fact, not only is it just one anonymous source, but think about it. I mean, all that's going on, and you think that Rosecrans has the time to have this encounter with
relieve Willich
brigadier general.
It doesn't make any sense to relieve Willich of duty in
right. Yeah.
in the middle of a battle. It's just insanity.
Yeah. So he recommended that I cut it, and I did. But it's too bad because it's a colorful story. I wish I could.
Now, the last thing we're going to finish on here for about an hour. I know you said you were available for an hour.
Yeah.
So the last thing we're going to finish on is La Marseillaise.
Yes.
Have you found, since we talked about this last, any evidence that when he was at Shiloh with his back to the enemy, the band played La Marseillaise?
Well, I haven't found direct evidence of that, and there's certainly the way that these lines were constructed, right? The band would have been way in the back, right? So I think it's extremely likely that when they were coming off the steamer John J. Roe at Pittsburgh Landing there and getting all psyched up for battle, and this is the way that I present it when I do a talk. In fact, I kick off my talk with that song. So,
do you play the version from Casablanca?
No, I play some instrumental version I heard on that I found on YouTube.
You got to start with the video of Bogart with the look at the band.
Yeah, I'll
I mean,
consider
how
that.
can you miss that? How can you miss that? Anyway, so
But yeah, so I mean, I think it's extremely likely that was played because that was their song. I mean, that was they had a lot of songs, but that was their favorite song. But it's really interesting because that song is a French revolutionary anthem, right? And we know how the French and German felt about each other in the 19th century. There was no love
they
lost,
did
and they
bring up
sing
the
it in
song.
French. Tim.
So
They're
what is
singing
your
it in French.
what is your understanding of the history of the song? Like, when did it begin? Who wrote
So the song began in the Rhine Valley. So that was a local song from the area where a lot of his revolutionaries were from.
Wow.
So that song was, I believe it was sung by some revolutionaries who were marching to Paris during one of the uprisings. I'm not sure which one.
What year are we talking about?
We're talking like 1787, trying to remember, 1788, somewhere in there. Yeah, so during the first French Revolution, right? So there's uprising, of course, there's a big uprising in Paris, there's uprisings all over, but they are marching from the Rhineland to go participate in that revolution. The song itself is really interesting because it's a very, so what I do is I play the song for my audience and then I show them the lyrics, and the lyrics are really inflammatory.
Oh yeah, it's like, we're gonna kick your ass.
Yeah. I mean, they're raping our wives, and we're going to I mean, it's a very violent revolution. But now it's the national anthem of France.
Right, everybody knows it, and it was in Casablanca, and over time, that scene from Casablanca has become definitive of the film itself.
Right. But I think the song itself, the reason I use it to lead off my talk is because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to talk about the international aspects of the U.S. Civil War, right? So this isn't just a brother against brother conflict. This is a global conflict for Republican government.
I mean, Karl Marx was writing about it, for Christ's sake.
Exactly.
He wrote more about the Civil War than he did about anything else.
Exactly. So what's better than having a German regiment singing a French song in France in a battle in the U.S.? I mean, that really shows you that this is a global conflict that just happens to be playing out at this time, at this moment in America, but it's much more than a sectional conflict, in my opinion. So
that is excellent.
You got any other questions for Dave?
I did really want to hear more about Willich and his organizing with the African American free community around Cincinnati, because that is just such an incredible story, and I think there's something for the left in broad strokes to learn from that. Of putting aside our differences and coming together in ways of solidarity and community. Could you speak more and elaborate more on that? Like, what was the extent of that? Was he trying to form like labor unions out of it? Like, what was his vision, with it? And how much did he do to pursue that before the war, after the war, all that?
Sure. So first of all, I mean, it's good to think about these abolitionists also in a much broader framework, right? So when we usually think about abolitionists like Willich, who was a radical abolitionist, but we usually think about a small group of religious fundamentalists in New England, right?
Your John Browns.
Yeah. Well, John Brown definitely plays into this, but
fundamentalist, yeah.
So religious fundamentalists, but this was not only a global abolition movement, but it also was, I mean, you had these 48ers who had entirely different reasons for wanting to free the slaves than some type of religious or even moral motivation. Although they did believed very strongly that slavery was immoral, but they also were very much concerned with the connection between enslavement and free labor. So they are consciously making that connection that I talked about earlier, that wage slavery argument, that essentially, even though the free blacks in the North are technically free, there are black laws that circumscribe their behavior and their movement and their freedom. And there's all kinds of privileges that they don't enjoy, and they certainly are not full citizens, right? So at this point, it's really a political alliance. It's a political alliance with labor undertones, I think. So you have, and the John Brown event is really kind of a catalyst for that.
Yeah, what did Willich think of John Brown? Please,
He gave a great speech. He had that whole rally the day after the arrest.
Willich
really? I missed this.
What did you read the book? Did you?
I
did. The book. You didn't even read the book, did you?
I did read the book.
You read the book.
Every page.
So Willich, Willich, not only does he feel like John Brown is a martyr and a hero, but Willich believes strongly that the ends justify the means in situations like that. So, for example, there was a man named Orsini who tries to assassinate Napoleon III in 1859.
Italian.
Willich was ready to dance, probably.
3 or 4 of these Italians go to Paris and literally throw bombs at Napoleon's carriage. And what happens? Well, Willich and his radical friends organize a celebration to protest the fact that Orsini has been executed for being a terrorist, essentially. And so when John Brown comes along, it's the same thing. It's like, you know what? The ends here are so important that it justifies any violent means.
Well,
So
what you wrote about his speech, it was a big rally. There were like 3,000 people or something in Cincinnati.
Right.
After they hanged John Brown, Willich gives a big speach.
Right. That's
What
right.
was the crowd like there? Was it a mix of like African American, German? Like, give us an idea of that.
Yeah. So it was in Melodeon Hall. So it's a very elegant hall. And in that hall, normally, there hung founders banners. So there was a banner of Washington that was always there. There's a banner of Jefferson that was always there. So in addition to that, you had Willich's, red Republican flags, red workers flags. And then you had banners. You had the local Black community also had a banner.
Great.
So,
Excellent.
I mean, can you imagine? You don't have to imagine. You can read the press reports for what they thought. I mean, they were just absolutely
they shit themselves. Didn't the Inquirer shit themselves? They were like, oh, here they come.
They all did.
I'm remembering this. Oh my God.
Willich's paper really was the only newspaper, because it's his newspaper, obviously, that supported this. I mean, the rival German papers were more conservative, and they thought this was an abomination. I mean, it's really hard for us to understand.
Did he make money at the newspaper? Because it sounds to me like he probably made some money at the newspaper.
No, not at all. In
No?
fact, one of the first things he did was he actually, they used to have a subscription fee, so he made the paper free for all the people that were in the
Because
workers.
he's awesome, but just because he's awesome.
Yeah.
Everything is always, he's just awesome.
Well, no. I mean, he definitely has flaws, but
He's got no flaws.
if you've seen his house in Cincinnati, it's literally 14 feet wide where he lived. I mean, it's
Wow.
It's probably
Is that a historical landmark, or
no?
you can't go? Can you go visit it at all, or?
You can walk by it. I don't know if you talk to some local Don Heinrich Toltzman in Cincinnati, can probably get you in there. But
Charisma my way in there.
By the way, Don was very helpful with some research for me.
Yeah.
All of what I found interesting about the German immigrant Civil War group of people who know anything about it, they are all extremely wonderful and helpful, and
Definitely.
they love that you're interested. They love that some dude from Cleveland just is interested.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's
so they're all very
because it's underserved. I mean, like you said at the outset, I mean, there's just so many stories here about these 216,000 Germans
Yeah,
that have not been told.
and it rearranges the entire history. Once you start looking at it, the entire history of the war begins to change before your eyes, and you're like, oh, this isn't really what they told me it was about.
Well, consider this this one statistic. If you take the black soldiers that served in the U.S. colored infantry
Yeah,
in the Civil War on the Union side, and then you add those people to the Irish and the Germans and the other foreign-born U.S. Union soldiers, that's more than 50% of the Union Army.
Oh my God.
So, I mean, how can you not make an argument that if the blacks and the immigrants were the majority of the Union Army, how can you not make the argument that they were essential to winning this war? You can't. I mean,
and not only that, you have to ask yourself, well, why were they doing it?
Yeah, these people did not have a big purchase or stake in society at the point.
Once you figure out why they were doing it, then you start looking around. You're like, everything's full of shit. You know, Ken Burns full of shit. Ted Turner full of shit. The whole thing is full of shit. You know, you're just like, wait a minute. There's like hundreds of thousands of stories of Germans that none of us know anything about.
Well, that's the other great point you make, Tim, is because, you know, if you look at why the war was waged from Lincoln's perspective, even though I think all along he's intending it to be a war against slavery, that's just my personal opinion. But politically, he is positioning this war strictly as a war to preserve the federal union. That the word union appears in no correspondence that I find from Willich.
And that was Marx's big criticism of
Really?
Marx's big criticism of Lincoln was he's waging a constitutional war, not a revolutionary war.
Right, exactly.
And once it became revolutionary with the Emancipation Proclamation, Marx is like, "Oh, that's over. You know, I'm gonna
Star Spangled Banner all over the First International."
The Stars and Stripes were at the First International. It was the flag around. Our flag was around the First International, and we don't learn this. We don't learn this about the left in America.
Yeah.
And your book, by the way, I'm not exaggerating when I say this. Your book should be required reading for anyone in the left in the United States. Certainly the United States, but probably the world. I mean, you have added such a great addition to the literature of the worldwide left. It is a crime that August Willich has not been addressed until now, but it is your privilege to do so, David, and you did it excellently, and we are very happy that you were here tonight. Thank you for joining us. Do you have any last words for our 3 viewers, which include my mother?
No, I've really enjoyed it too, and like I said, there's a lot of great stories to be told, and there's a lot of other, I think, people from the 19th century that we can take some inspiration from. We just need to dig them up and flesh them out and get them on paper so people can learn about them. So thank you very much for having me.
Enjoy your
thank you, David.
Enjoy your journey to the radical left, David.
I'm moving closer and closer to you each day.
We got to get you on Chapo. This has to happen.
When are you on Chapo? Let's talk about that. Has he read your book? Has he read your book yet?
I don't know if he's read it. He definitely has it, but I don't know if he's.
You tell him to get off the schneid and start reading the book, because we are waiting for this review of your book.
Well, I tell you what, I've got to do some major homework before I face off with Matt Christman. Let me tell you.
No.
Have you watched any of his streams or no? Have you watched any of his streams?
Oh yeah. I've watched a lot of his streams, and I'd never watched any before Tim Russo told me about it. So, but now I'm
there's this whole leftist podcast and whatnot community that, I mean, August Willich is red meat too. Like, he is such a dynamic character that, like, I really feel there's a big void in leftist American history that he can just step into, especially from the German Americans' perspective. Like, that void is as large as it gets. it's his, in my opinion. Like, I would love to have a German restaurant with a statue of August Willich on his horse just out in front. Just
That would
like
be the first statue in America. And by
really,
the way, there's no statue of him in Germany either. So
that is a crime.
Is that what the statue's gonna look like?
yeah, exactly. That's my proposal.
Minus the soy face.
Well, thanks again, guys. This has
All
been
right,
fun.
enjoy your walk tonight. Say hi to the missus, and you
All right.
will have a good holiday season.
Yeah, great meeting you, Jonathan.
Yes, it was great meeting you too. Please send Tim that pamphlet so I can
Yes,
get.
I want every city he ever wrote in the Republicaner. I want the first, but it's starting.
Actually, we've already been asked to assemble an archive. So, I mean, that is a project that we're going to work on to
That is
try
the
to.
most important unpublished in English writing in American history. Is August Willich, whatever the fuck he said in that paper. That we need to have all of it.
I would read every copy. Every
working on
copy.
It's going to take a couple of years. We're working on it.
Thanks, Dave.